I didn't go there to fix my marriage. I went there to look into the eyes of the man who was sleeping with my wife, and see what he had that I didn't. I expected arrogance. I expected guilt. Maybe even a smirk. What I didn't expect was to see a man who looked just as betrayed as I felt. The first sign wasn't dramatic. There were no lipstick stains. No mysterious late-night calls whispered behind closed doors. Just small, almost forgettable shifts, the kind you'd feel before you could explain them. She started sleeping on the far edge of the bed. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was warm. Maybe I was moving too much in my sleep. But the distance felt intentional. There was a carefulness in the way she positioned her body, like she was protecting something fragile between us. Or hiding something. Her laughter changed too. It used to spill out freely when I said something stupid. Now it came delayed, polite, as if she were reacting out of habit instead of joy. Sometimes she smiled down at her phone in that quiet, private way people do when they're being seen, really seen, by someone on the other side of the screen. And that's when I started noticing the phone. She angled it away from me without thinking. Turned the brightness down at night. Carried it with her to the bathroom. I didn't want to become the kind of man who watches. Who counts? Who doubts? But I started counting anyway. The night I found out, the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft rhythm of her breathing beside me. The room was dark, washed in shadows, when her phone lit up on the nightstand. Just once. A quiet vibration. A soft glow. I don't know why I looked. Maybe part of me had already prepared for it. The name on the screen wasn't one I recognized. Not a coworker. Not a cousin. Just a first name, simple, masculine. And below it, a message preview. I still can't stop thinking about last night. My chest didn't explode with anger. It didn't burn. It dropped. Like missing a step in the dark. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, watching the light fade back into blackness. She shifted in her sleep, turning slightly toward me, her hand brushing my arm for half a second before settling back against her pillow. The contact felt foreign. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. My mind didn't race. It slowed. Every moment from the past few months replayed with new meaning, the sudden gym membership, the late meetings, the way she'd started wearing perfume on ordinary Tuesdays. I could confront her right then. Shake her awake. Demand answers. But I didn't. Because deep down, I already had them. What scared me most wasn't losing her. It was realizing I might have already lost her weeks ago, and only just now caught up to the truth. I reached for her phone when her breathing steadied again. My fingers hovered over it, trembling, not from rage, but from the quiet understanding that once I crossed this line, there was no going back. The screen lit up in my hand. More messages. Plans. Intimacy. Familiarity. Not a mistake. A pattern. I set the phone back exactly where it had been and lay there beside my wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, feeling like a stranger in my own bed. And instead of asking why, I found myself staring at his name. Thinking only one thing. I need to see him. The morning after felt strangely normal. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, warming the bedroom walls in soft gold. She moved around the kitchen humming quietly while making coffee, the same way she always had. If I hadn't seen the messages, I might have believed nothing had changed. She handed me a mug with a small smile. Big day today. Her voice sounded gentle. Familiar. Almost loving. I searched her face for guilt, some crack in the performance, but there was nothing obvious. Just calm eyes and practiced ease. That scared me more than anything. Whatever was happening between us hadn't started overnight. It had grown slowly, quietly, while I stood right beside her. Yeah, I said, forcing my voice steady. Just work. The lie came easier than expected. All day, I moved through routines automatically. Emails. Meetings. Conversations I barely heard. My thoughts kept circling back to one thing, his name. During lunch, I finally searched for it. It didn't take long to find him. A professional website appeared first, clean design, neutral colors, confident but understated photos. He ran a private consulting practice. Leadership coaching. Personal development. The kind of work that required listening, patience, emotional intelligence. I stared at his photo longer than I meant to. Mid-40s, maybe. Composed expression. Slight lines near his eyes that suggested warmth rather than arrogance. Not flashy. Not threatening. Just steady. I felt an unexpected flicker of confusion. This wasn't the image I had built in my head. I'd imagined someone careless, charming in a shallow way. Someone easy to hate. Instead, he looked like someone people trusted. My stomach tightened. At the bottom of the page sat a booking form. Schedule a consultation. My cursor hovered over it for several seconds. I told myself this was stupid. Petty. Pointless. No good could come from inserting myself into his life like this. But another thought pushed through louder, I needed to understand. Not what she saw in him, that question felt too painful, but who he actually was. Whether he knew. Whether this was deliberate or just collateral damage. I typed a fake name. The act felt surreal, like stepping into a role I hadn't rehearsed. New email address. New backstory. My fingers moved carefully, deliberately, as if precision could keep my emotions contained. When I clicked confirm, a calendar notification appeared instantly. Thursday. 3 p.m. It was real now. That evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. My reflection looked unchanged, but something behind my eyes felt older. Tired. Sharper. I practiced neutral expressions without meaning to, calm, polite, unreadable. If I was going to sit across from the man sleeping with my wife, he couldn't recognize anything in me. Not anger. Not pain. Not recognition. Just another client. The realization hit me slowly, I had already been pretending for weeks. Pretending our marriage was fine. Pretending I didn't notice the distance. Pretending love alone could hold two people together. This was just a different kind of performance. On Thursday afternoon, I arrived early and sat in my car across the street from his office building. People walked past casually, unaware that my entire life felt suspended between breaths. My hands rested on the steering wheel, slightly damp. I considered leaving. Driving away. Going home. Asking her directly and ending the uncertainty. But I didn't start the engine. Instead, I stepped out into the cool air, adjusted my coat, and walked toward the entrance. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time I reached his office door, my heartbeat echoed loudly in my ears, steady but relentless. My hand hovered over the handle. One simple movement separated who I had been from whoever I was about to become. The door opened before I had time to second-guess myself. He stood there, taller than I expected, dressed simply in a dark button-down with the sleeves rolled just enough to show his forearms. Not flashy. Not trying too hard. Just composed. "Hi," he said, offering a small, professional smile. "You must be Daniel." The name I'd given him. For a split second, I forgot to respond. Then I nodded. "Yeah." He stepped aside to let me in. "Come in. I'm glad you made it." His voice was calm, steady in a way that made you instinctively lower your own. There was nothing rushed about him. Nothing performative. If he recognized anything tense or unusual in me, he didn't show it. The office was warm. Soft lighting. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with titles about leadership, relationships, psychology. A faint scent of cedar and something clean lingered in the air. Grounding. Intentional. He gestured toward a chair across from his desk, but not directly opposite, angled slightly, less confrontational. A small detail. But I noticed. As I sat down, he extended his hand. The handshake was firm, but not aggressive. His palm was warm. His grip steady, the kind of touch that communicates confidence without dominance. It lasted a second longer than strictly necessary, as if to anchor the introduction. "Tell me what brought you in," he said, settling into his chair. And just like that, the man I'd built up in my head, the villain, the intruder, was sitting across from me, looking at me with patient curiosity. I studied him while pretending to organize my thoughts. There were faint lines near his eyes, the kind that come from squinting in sunlight or smiling often. His hair was neatly kept, a few strands of gray visible at the temples. He carried himself with quiet assurance, not arrogance. It unsettled me. I'd expected to feel immediate anger, a surge of heat, something explosive. Instead, I felt disoriented. He leaned forward slightly as I began the rehearsed version of my fake story, something about feeling stuck, disconnected, unsure about the direction of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. And he listened. Not the polite kind of listening where someone waits for their turn to speak. Real listening. His eyes stayed on mine, focused but soft. He nodded occasionally, asking small, clarifying questions. "How long have you been feeling that way? What do you think changed?" His tone wasn't clinical. It was human. At one point, when I hesitated mid-sentence, not because of the script, but because the truth threatened to break through, he didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it sit. Let me breathe. That patience did something to me. I imagined him sitting across from my wife like this. Listening. Understanding. Offering the kind of steady presence I hadn't realized she might have been missing. The thought tightened my chest. But still, there was no smugness in him. No hidden smirk. No sign he was aware of any betrayal. If anything, there was a trace of weariness behind his composure. A heaviness that didn't quite match the polished exterior. As the session ended, he stood and walked me toward the door. "If you'd like to schedule another appointment," he said gently, "we can keep working through this. You don't have to figure everything out alone." The words hit harder than they should have. Outside the office, the air felt cooler against my skin. I stood there for a moment, replaying every second. I had gone there expecting to confirm my anger. Instead, I left with something far more complicated. Because the man I'd just met wasn't the monster I needed him to be. I told myself I wouldn't go back. One meeting was enough. I had seen him. Heard him. Confirmed he was real. That should have satisfied whatever restless need had pushed me through his door in the first place. But it didn't. For 3 days, I replayed the session in my head, not just what he said, but how he said it. The steady tone. The way he let silence breathe instead of forcing answers. The faint crease between his brows when he listened too closely. It didn't add up. If he was knowingly sleeping with a married woman, he hid it well. On Monday morning, I booked another appointment. This time, my hands didn't shake when I typed the fake name. The lie felt smoother now. Too smooth. When I arrived, he greeted me with the same calm warmth, though something about him seemed heavier. "You came back," he said with a small smile. "That's usually a good sign." I shrugged lightly, settling into the chair. "Guess I'm still stuck." He leaned back slightly, studying me in that attentive way that made you feel both exposed and understood. "Stuck often means something isn't aligning," he said. "Usually between what we want and what we're willing to admit." The words lingered in the air. For a moment, I wondered if he could somehow see through me. If he sensed the layers beneath my rehearsed story. Halfway through the session, the conversation shifted unexpectedly. He paused after one of my vague answers and exhaled softly, rubbing his temple with 2 fingers. "Can I be honest with you?" he asked. I nodded. "I've been feeling something similar lately," he admitted. In my personal life. That caught me off guard. He rarely redirected attention to himself. But this felt unplanned, almost involuntary. There's someone, he continued, voice measured but quieter than before. We've been seeing each other for a few months. It's complicated. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. She told me she was separated, he added. Said the marriage had been over long before I came into the picture. He gave a short, humorless laugh. I believed her. The room seemed smaller suddenly. He wasn't boasting. There was no pride in his tone. Just fatigue. Do you think she was lying? I asked carefully. He hesitated. I don't know, he said finally. Sometimes I feel like I'm only getting half the truth. Like there's a door she won't fully open. My pulse thudded in my ears. She cancels last minute sometimes. Keeps parts of her life compartmentalized. I told myself it's because she's protecting her privacy. He shook his head slightly. But lately, it feels more like distance. The irony pressed against my ribs like a weight. He thought he was the outsider. He didn't know he was standing in the middle of someone else's marriage. As he spoke, his posture shifted, shoulders dropping, composure thinning just enough to reveal something raw underneath. For the first time, he wasn't the confident consultant. He was just a man unsure of where he stood in someone's life. Our knees brushed briefly when he leaned forward to emphasize a point. It was accidental. Barely there. But the contact felt grounding. Human. I searched his face for any trace of manipulation, any sign he was performing vulnerability to mask guilt. There was none. Only confusion. And maybe, hurt. In that moment, the narrative I'd built, the villain, the predator, the man stealing my wife, cracked quietly down the center. He wasn't orchestrating an affair. He was inside a lie. Just like I was. And for the first time since this began, my anger shifted. Not gone. But complicated by something far more dangerous. Understanding. I didn't plan to tell him that day. I had imagined a dramatic reveal at some point, something controlled, deliberate. But when the moment came, it didn't feel cinematic. It felt heavy. Inevitable. We were nearing the end of the session. The late afternoon light filtered through the blinds, striping the room in muted gold and shadow. He sat across from me, elbows resting loosely on his knees, listening as I trailed off mid-sentence. You're holding something back, he said gently. It wasn't accusatory. Just observant. My throat tightened. This was the man my wife had chosen to confide in. To touch. To share laughter with. The man who had unknowingly stepped into the space that used to belong to me. And he was asking me to be honest. The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I inhaled slowly, feeling my heartbeat press against my ribs. There's something you should know, I said. He straightened slightly, giving me his full attention. I'm not here because I feel stuck in my career. My voice sounded steadier than I expected. I'm here because of her. A faint crease appeared between his brows. Her. I nodded once. The woman you've been seeing. The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, he didn't move at all. Then he leaned back slowly, as if recalibrating the distance between us. I don't understand, he said carefully. I held his gaze. I'm her husband. The words didn't echo. They didn't explode. They simply settled in the room between us like something fragile and irreversible. His color drained almost instantly. Not dramatically, just a subtle paling, the kind that happens when blood shifts under shock. He blinked once. Twice. That's not possible, he murmured, more to himself than to me. She told you we were separated. It wasn't a question. He exhaled sharply through his nose, standing abruptly before catching himself and sitting back down. His hands pressed flat against the desk, fingers spread as if grounding himself in something solid. I didn't know, he said, voice low. I swear to you, I didn't know. There was no defensiveness in his tone. No attempt to shift blame. Just disbelief, and something dangerously close to regret. I watched him carefully, searching for cracks in his reaction. For signs of performance. There were none. His jaw tightened as understanding settled in. We talked about it. I asked her. More than once. He shook his head slowly. She said it was over. That the paperwork just wasn't finalized. A bitter weight rose in my chest, but it wasn't aimed at him anymore. I found the messages, I said quietly. I saw how you talked to each other. His shoulders sagged at that, as if a truth he hadn't fully faced had just been placed in his hands. I never would've, he stopped himself. Closed his eyes briefly. I would never knowingly step into someone's marriage. The room felt different now. The tension wasn't sharp anymore. It was raw. Exposed. We weren't rivals sitting across from each other. We were two men trying to make sense of the same betrayal. After a long silence, he looked at me again, not as a client. Not as a threat. As an equal in damage. I'm sorry, he said. It wasn't performative. It wasn't defensive. It was simple. And painfully sincere. In that moment, I realized something unexpected. The anger I had carried into that office no longer had a place to land. After the confession, neither of us rushed to leave. The room felt stripped of pretense now. The fake name. The professional distance. The quiet investigation I had orchestrated, all of it dissolved into something far more human. He sat back in his chair, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped as if holding together thoughts that no longer made sense. I feel stupid, he admitted finally, voice rougher than before. Not because I cared about her, but because I believed her without question. I let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in my lungs for weeks. I feel stupid too. For trusting. For ignoring the small signs. For loving without noticing the shift. The symmetry between us was unsettling. He looked up at me, really looked at me this time, not as a client, not as an adversary, but as someone standing in the same wreckage. How long? He asked quietly. Months, I replied. Maybe longer than I realized. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. There was no defensiveness left in him. No instinct to protect himself. Only a quiet unraveling. She made me feel, he hesitated, searching for the right word. Chosen. The honesty in that word hit harder than any accusation could have. I know, I said before I could stop myself. Because she used to make me feel that way too. A long silence settled between us, not awkward, not hostile. Just heavy with shared understanding. At some point, he moved from behind the desk and sat in the chair angled closer to mine. Not confrontational. Not intimate. Just closer. The space between us shrinking from professional distance to something more personal. We were both living in different versions of the same story, he said softly. I nodded. Our shoulders nearly touched now. Close enough to feel the warmth of another person in the room. Close enough to realize how isolating the last few weeks had been. When he placed his hand briefly on my shoulder, it wasn't possessive or overly familiar. It was grounding. Firm. Steady. I'm sorry she hurt you, he said. The simple acknowledgement did something inside me that anger never could. It made the pain feel seen instead of invisible. I'm sorry she lied to you, I replied. His thumb pressed lightly against my shoulder before he withdrew his hand, the contact lingering in warmth even after it was gone. Neither of us blamed the other. Neither of us raised our voices. Instead, we talked. About how easy it is to believe what we want to believe. About how love, or the idea of it, can blur boundaries we thought we'd never cross. About the quiet humiliation of realizing you were the last to know. At one point, he let out a small, breathless laugh. I give people advice for a living. Guess no one's immune, I said. Our eyes met again, and this time there was no rivalry behind it. Just recognition. We weren't connected by desire. Or competition. We were connected by truth. And in that fragile, quiet space, sitting closer than strangers usually do, I realized something unexpected. The man I thought I needed to defeat was the only one who fully understood what I was losing. We didn't make any dramatic declarations. There was no pact sealed in anger, no revenge plotted across the desk. Just two men sitting in the quiet aftermath of a truth that had reshaped both our lives. "She's going to have to tell you," he said finally. His voice had steadied again, but it carried something deeper now, resolve. "And I'll step away." Completely. I studied his face as he said it. There was no hesitation there. No bargaining. Just acceptance. "You don't owe me that," I replied. He held my gaze. "Maybe not. But I owe myself better." That landed softly between us. For a moment, neither of us moved. The late afternoon light had shifted, the room dimmer now, shadows stretching across the floor. It felt symbolic in a way I couldn't quite explain, like something ending quietly rather than exploding. He stood first. I followed. We faced each other without the desk between us this time. No barrier. No performance. Just proximity. Up close, I could see the faint exhaustion in his eyes more clearly now. Not weakness, just the wear of someone recalibrating their reality. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said. "I know," I answered. And I did. The handshake we exchanged was different from the first one. Slower. Intentional. His grip tightened slightly, not in dominance, but in acknowledgement. The warmth of his palm felt grounding instead of threatening. Before I could overthink it, he stepped forward and pulled me into a brief embrace. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't overly familiar. It was human. His hand pressed firmly between my shoulder blades for just a second, steady, supportive, then he stepped back. The contact lingered like a quiet reassurance, "You're not alone in this." I walked out of his office into cool evening air, drawing in a breath that felt cleaner than any I'd taken in weeks. The confrontation I had imagined, the rage, the shouting, never came. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. That night, I sat across from my wife at the kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared meals and laughter and plans. She looked at me with mild confusion at first, until she saw something in my expression that made her sit up straighter. "I know," I said calmly. "No accusation. No theatrics. Just truth." Her face crumpled slowly, not from shock, but from exposure. The careful compartments she'd built were collapsing. I met him. That was when the silence truly settled. We talked for hours. Hard conversations. Honest ones. Not about him, but about us. About the distance that had grown unnoticed. About needs unspoken and resentment unaddressed. By the end of it, something had shifted permanently. We both understood that love without honesty doesn't survive. And sometimes, neither do marriages. A week later, I received a short message from him. "I've ended it. I hope you find peace." No more. No less. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. But because the chapter had closed exactly the way it needed to. I went there to confront the man who was sleeping with my wife. I expected to see my enemy. Instead, I saw a reflection, another person caught in the same lie, trying to make sense of it. Losing her hurt. But walking away with dignity. That changed me forever.